Genuine hospitality is sometimes harder than it seems. Many summers ago, before I arrived here, and while I was in seminary, I lived in Ohio for 6 weeks. On accepting a fellowship to be the summer minister at the First Unitarian Church of Cleveland, I had to scramble to find a place to live. As it turns out, 6 weeks is an awkward length of time, too long to live happily in a hotel and too short to lease an apartment. And unfortunately, this was long before the advent of Airbnb. I looked into subletting an extended stay apartment, but none of the options was all that compelling or comforting. Because I had a massive amount of reading and studying to do, I thought about calling upon the Benedictine monastery that was a short distance away. As I thought more and more about it, I grew excited at the idea of turning my stay into a 6-week retreat, a change of pace from the rhythms of my life back at home. I fantasized about living out the daily schedule of a monk, turning my full attention to a life of quiet contemplation and study. I imagined long blocks of silent meditation, interrupted only by a tolling bell calling me to dinner or to my daily chores. Now, to make clear just exactly how over-romanticized my thinking had grown, I should confess that I have generally failed to find enlightenment by taking deep delight in cutting up carrots at home or mopping the floors. Still, somehow I just knew that life would feel so much more spiritual in a monastery. And while I might not find nirvana, I did think that I might just gain some insight into what it means to be a Unitarian living around the clock in a religious community dedicated to spiritual practice. I also figured I can handle anything for 6 weeks. So I wrote a letter to the abbot explaining my situation and expressing my desire for an environment in which I could study while contributing to the daily work of the brothers in the monastery. A few days passed, and I received a phone call from the abbot. He told me that he knew of this church where I would be working, and he then said, "As you well know, you all are more liberal than we are." In that moment, hearing the tone of his voice, I knew that I wasn't going to be spending the summer in a monastery after all. Now, if he had just said no, it would have been easier to take. But instead, he felt compelled to tell me that his community was very welcoming and appreciated people from other faiths, but that in the end, he just didn't feel comfortable having a UU seminarian around. At first, I thought, well, it's better to learn this sooner than later. But our conversation gnawed at me for days. And not just because I had been rejected for my faith, which was small potatoes compared to what some of our forebears endured. What really got to me was that I had just been shunned by a religious order that holds up hospitality as their core spiritual practice. The famous Rule of Saint Benedict, written more than 1,500 years ago and still guiding Benedictine monasteries today, says that all guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ. Well, so much for that. In fairness to the abbot, 6 weeks is an odd length of time, and perhaps he was wise to recognize the chasm between our beliefs. But as A. Powell Davies put it, how strange and foolish are these walls of separation that divide us. Shortly after this experience, over dinner with a group of friends, I told my tale of woe. One friend who is Buddhist said that I hadn't tried hard enough. He told of the practice in Zen monasteries of how potential initiates are repeatedly refused admittance as a way of testing the depth of their commitment for taking up Buddhist practice as a monk or a nun. In approaching a traditional Japanese monastery to begin practice, you are expected to have left behind all that you hold most dear, that you might find the courage to face yourself unencumbered. And so you would arrive with a small bag with only a few personal necessities. As you approach the front of the monastery, there would be a high wall with a large gate, an imposing entrance called the Mountain Gate, because beginning Zen is like climbing a mountain. But before setting off on the full-time path to enlightenment, you do have to get your foot in the door. And so you knock. Eventually, you'll be greeted by a very mean monk who will tell you that the monastery is too full or too poor to accept another student. And then, for good measure, he'll probably suggest that you wouldn't like it there anyway. If you haven't yet been scared away, you try again. And so does the monk, who will return to berate you for not understanding what he has already told you. Adding insult to injury, he will likely swear and swat at your head, and then close the door. And you knock again, and again, and again, and the door remains closed. Darkness falls and doubts set in. Maybe you think you just really aren't cut out for this after all. But if you somehow decide that you are, you draw yourself together on the stoop, sitting with your arms wrapped around your knees and your face buried between them. And whether it's obvious or not, you are being carefully watched. But if the monk reappears, it's only to chase you off. You might remain seated on the steps until dawn, or you might finally be allowed into the monastery to sleep in a hallway. In any case, the next morning you will find yourself out on the steps again, going through the same ordeal all over. On the second night, you might be allowed to stay overnight in an open courtyard. The next day, you'll be expected to sit in the lotus position should anyone happen by to see you. This excruciating and lonely experience is called Tengengaro. It is at the end of the day that you might be introduced to a monk who would finally start to question your motives and your background. If you are then found to be sincere, you would be given a probationary place in the Zendo and shown how to begin meditation. Still, it might take weeks or months before you'd be introduced to the teacher of the Zendo and allowed to begin to actually practice Zen. Now, hearing all of this reminded me of my experience to some extent with the Benedictine abbot. And hearing all of this reminded me, and maybe some of you, of a typical Unitarian coffee hour full of questions. The fact is that our communities, at least back in the day when we gathered for coffee in person, have not always been as welcoming to the stranger as we might have imagined them to be. On any given Sunday in most UU congregations, newcomers were likely to find a bit of Benedictine hospitality, as well as a few closed doors, not unlike the Mountain Gate. As we move ever so slowly towards life beyond the pandemic, we have ongoing work to do as a community to truly practice the art of hospitality, especially as we prepare to move and settle in a new neighborhood. For we may soon find ourselves strangers in a strange land and in need of hospitality ourselves. But the beauty of hospitality is that it has a way of flowing in both directions. It is our shared vulnerability in this world that makes such reciprocity so essential. In ancient times, there was a moral mandate to welcome the stranger as though their life depended on it, because it just might. Such hospitality has always hinged on the recognition of the sacred in the other. It is at the root of the golden rule around the world. It's what Jesus meant when he said that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves, that by doing so, we might come to see all those who journey with us through this world as having inherent worth and dignity all their own. Yet in our time, this sense of responsibility to the stranger or even to our neighbors can seem to be in short supply, especially now, a year and a half into this pandemic, as so many of us have lived, at least to some extent, closed off from the world and from those around us. With our faces so often masked, there's a real risk of treating our neighbors quite literally like faceless automatons, be they delivering our dinner or bagging our groceries. Perhaps you have found yourself like me, sometimes overcompensating, trying awkwardly to somehow convey a smile through my mask as I negotiate the narrow sidewalk with other pedestrians or try to navigate my buggy through the aisles of the grocery store. As a wise 13-year-old said to me earlier this week when I asked how she was feeling about the return to in-person classes at school, I'm going to have to learn how to act around other people again. I suspect that may be true for many of us. While the pandemic has in so many ways brought out the very best of our humanity, it's also revealed at times just how very human we can be, which isn't always a compliment. Maybe we have forgotten our manners, or maybe we have forgotten our shared humanity. Whatever the cause, hospitality calls us to pay attention. And maybe that is why the Benedictines have made a practice of hospitality, for it surely takes sustained effort to learn how to pay such attention. I've recently had yet another monastery story on my mind. Maybe you've heard this one. I've updated and adapted the Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield's version. It goes like this. Deep in the forest, there was a monastery that had fallen on hard times. Once thriving, things had now become so bad that there were only the abbot and a few monks left. The monastery seemed well past its better days. In despair, the abbot decided to seek the counsel of a wise rabbi who was his friend. The rabbi welcomed the abbot and listened very carefully. And when the abbot finished his tale, the rabbi only shook his head and said, "I know how it is. The spirit has gone from the people. It's the same here in my synagogue. Almost no one comes here anymore." The two men wept together and spoke of many deep things. Eventually, the abbot had to leave, and they embraced. And as they did so, the rabbi said, "I'm sorry I had no advice for you. The only thing I can tell you is that the Messiah is one of you." The abbot returned to the monastery and sadly told the monks that the rabbi couldn't help. He said that they had just wept and read the Torah together. And then he said the only thing that he did say was that the Messiah was one of us, but that I have no idea what he meant. The monks themselves pondered. What did the rabbi mean? Could the Messiah really be one of them? Maybe it was the abbot or Brother Thomas, who was so clearly a holy man. It was surely not Brother Michael. He was too crotchety. But though when you come right down to it, Brother Michael was always the one who was right about things. Sister Margaret, no, she's quite too quiet and passive. Still, though, when you really need someone, she always had a way of magically appearing. They thought that maybe the rabbi meant one of the visitors who came there from time to time was the Messiah, and wondered if the Messiah had come and they had missed it. And they thought to themselves, surely the rabbi didn't mean me, for I am just an ordinary person. All of this pondering continued. And as it did, the monks began to treat each other with great care, just in case one of them really was the Messiah. They began to treat themselves with great care too, just in case. Occasionally, hikers coming through the forest would visit the monastery, sometimes stopping to pray in the old chapel. And they began to notice something strangely compelling about the monastery. For one thing, the monks radiated love and respect. People began to make special trips to the forest just to be in the presence of the monks. They brought their families and friends to show them this special place. Some of the younger folks began sitting together in a group to hear the teachings of the monks. And then one young person decided to join, and then someone else joined, and another and another. Within a few years, the monastery was thriving again. Thanks to the rabbi, it had become a vibrant center of light and love. The seed that he had planted called them to risk living as though the sacred dwelt among them. And that vision helped turn their concern into care and their faith into action. And in that, they found common ground from which to change their corner of the world that they had met in this calling to radical hospitality. The promise of reciprocity, of being cared for and the obligation to care for others, has always been behind this religious practice of hospitality. In ancient times, the kindness of strangers was very often the only buffer between life and death. A cup of water, a safe place to sleep. Though much has changed about the world we live in, our need for this ancient covenant has not. The late great Unitarian theologian Henry Nelson Wyman said, "Love opens the way for a creative transformation which will vastly magnify the good of life beyond anything else." With all of my being, I believe in that transforming power of love. I believe it can change the world and that it must. But it is only by recognizing the love that dwells within and between and beyond us that we approach the transforming truth in those words, as we slowly become like those monks, finding ourselves in the presence of something truly sacred and then being changed by it in the process. To speak of the fragile art of hospitality is to speak of such a love that goes the distance. As Unitarian Universalists, this is our gospel. This is our good news. That in building up communities of care that transcend our petty differences, that actively reach beyond the walls that separate us one from another, that we speak through our lives to the transforming love that can change our world and even ourselves for good. May it be so this day and every day. Amen.